We are going to shift gears, though. This does not relate to desired future conditions, but it does relate to phone calls that I think a number of districts are seeing or getting. We are going to have with us Ramón Treviño. He's the program manager at the Gulf Coast Carbon Center at the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT. And he's going to be talking with us about carbon capture and sequestration and what that may mean or not mean for groundwater in our aquifers. So let's welcome Ramón.
Thank you. When I was over here before the session started this morning, because I always like to sort of get the lay of the land, what's going on here, and I told the audiovisual guys in the back, I said, okay, I see how this works. You know, you press the green arrow to go forward, you press the red one to go back, and I said, but I really want to press that one that says danger. Is that okay? And they said, no, don't press that one. So I won't do that. But let me test this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my name is Ramón Treviño. I am at the Bureau of Economic Geology, been there since 1995. And I'm really pleased to be here talking to you all this morning. I believe that I'm the first person in our group, the Gulf Coast Carbon Center, to come and talk to TAGD, not because we haven't wanted to, but because I think that if we'd come here 15 years ago, there would have been a lot of head bobs. Y'all would have said, we don't care about this. What are you talking to us about? Now, as Leah said, I think a lot of y'all, a lot of the districts are getting phone calls, you know, with people that are scared and upset and saying, what the heck is this? And why are they wanting to do it here? So I've learned a lot just in listening to this session this morning. It's not my background, so it's really interesting. This is a whole nother world. They are related worlds, but it's totally different. So I'm not going to even get close to explaining all of this to you all. But I want to give you a big, high-level overview of what carbon capture and sequestration is and how groundwater is tied to it. And to do that, I want to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm going to talk about who and what is GCCC. That's the Gulf Coast Carbon Center at the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology. Then I'll go into what is CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, or storage. You'll hear me use both words. And why is it needed? Then how's CCS done? And then at the very end of my talk, I'm going to have a few recommendations for y'all. Sort of a take-home homework for you. You know, because you are, if you haven't already, some of you are going to be getting phone calls about this. So anyway, stay tuned. So the Gulf Coast Carbon Center is a group of researchers at the Bureau of Economic Geology. You heard from my boss yesterday, some of you did, on geothermal energy, Ken Wizian. And also you heard from Robert Mace. And I know a lot of y'all know Robert. Robert was at the Bureau of Economic Geology when I first started there, and he left, I guess, within the last 15, 20 years. The Bureau, in addition to being a research organization, is actually the Geological Survey of the state of Texas. And there's a lot of different geological and geoscience research that happens there. It's the oldest research institute in the University of Texas system. It was founded in 1909. So, and GCCC is not nearly that old, but we are one of the oldest research organizations in the world doing research on CCS, carbon capture and storage. And as you see here, we're quite a large group at this point, and we have been for quite a while. We were founded in 1998, which is 25 years ago, and, oops, wrong one. Let me go back. Sue Hovorka, some of y'all may recognize her name. She did a lot of research in the 90s on the Edwards Aquifer. And back in the late 90s, Sue started hearing about this carbon sequestration thing. And she got interested in it, and she saw that it was something that really needed to be, was going to be in the forefront of research. And so she had the vision to start doing research in CCS. She got her first grant from the U.S. Department of Energy back then. Since then, as I said, the group has grown quite a bit. You can see we've got a lot of researchers here, and then a whole group of graduate students, in addition to undergraduate students and postdoctoral fellows. Some of these faces change every year as, academic years come and go. But we're a large group. We've been doing this for a long time. And at the risk of being immodest, we are one of the top groups in the world. We're right up the road. And I'm going to say this over and over to you. We're here to answer your questions. I'm not going to answer all your questions today, but please come and talk to us. If you have questions, concerns, etc. We're here, and part of our mission is to, oh gosh, I thought I had this down. Part of our mission is to do research, but it's also to do outreach to the public and to stakeholders such as you. Stakeholders such as professionals, geoscientists and engineers who are going to actually be doing the carbon sequestration in the future. We've been around, like I said, for 25 years. We've done a lot of research, mostly, but not exclusively, in this part of the world. We are actually the Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, so we're interested in our backyard. But we've done research in Australia, in the North Sea, et cetera. I'll just go over very quickly over some of the work that we've done. That includes one of our earliest field projects at the Sac Rock field in West Texas, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We also did the first highly monitored CO2 injection for saline storage, and saline being saline aquifer storage of carbon dioxide back in 2004, 5, and 6. This was the first in the United States, and it was only the second in the world. We also did quite a large field research study in an old oil and gas field in southwest Mississippi called the Cranfield Field. It was operated and still is operated by Denbury Resources. That was in from 2007 to 2008. All of these were funded by the Department of Energy. These are large grants. We have to go out there. They're competitive grants. And that's how we fund ourselves for the most part. We are also a research consortium, so an industry academic consortium. So our consortium does fund us to some degree, but most of our funding comes from Department of Energy. To a smaller degree, we've gotten some grants from the Texas General Land Office. The consortium includes companies, petroleum industry companies, as well as EDFs. Scott Anderson has been a friend to GCCC almost since its funding, so we know EDF, and they're one of our sponsors. They get a freebie. They don't have to pay, but the others do. There's also power generation companies such as NRG, et cetera, that are part of our consortium. And they kind of act as our board, but they don't tell us what to do, and they don't tell us how to do our research. But they do allow us a little bit of leeway to do interesting research that the Department of Energy is not necessarily interested in, and they help fund some of our graduate students. So in the last 25 years at some of these field sites, we've stored and monitored approximately 11 million tons of CO2, and that's a lot. That's a lot of fluid that's been injected deep into the ground, deep into the subsurface. And so like I said, we're one of the premier organizations in the world, and I'm glad we're here to reach out to y'all, because we really are a resource that we hope you will reach out to in the future. So what is CCS and why is it needed? So let me, as I go through that, let me talk about a couple of different things. One of them being something that's called a stabilization wedges, what CO2 geologic storage is, and then where it's generally going to be done. So this concept came out about 20 years ago from a couple of guys at Princeton University, and they were looking at climate models that said, if we continue to emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as we're doing, we're probably going to start running into problems. I'm not here to argue about that. That's not what I do. I look at the underground, the subsurface. I'm a geologist. This is atmospheric science. Anyway, so they said, well, if we're going to address that issue, how do we do it? And so they said, well, we can't do it all with one thing, so let's just do a whole bunch of stuff. And they proposed, you know, things like biofuels, wind energy, solar energy. Back then, people were like rolling their eyes. Well, now, you know, state of Texas has a ton of wind energy and a lot of solar energy. So some of that's come to pass for, you know, whatever, you know, good or ill, it's come to pass. But CCS is one of the wedges. And the ones in blue there have to do with fossil fuels. And that's what CCS is about. It's mitigating the emissions of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, from power generation plants, coal plants, gas plants, from refineries, from cement production, from steel mills, from petrochemical plants, et cetera. So that's what CCS, the stabilization wedge concept. CCS is one of the wedges. And so the next question is, where are we going to do it? Oh, first, how are we going to do it? So this is a general figure that we've had for a long time. And one of the things that's changed since we made this figure about 16, 17 years ago was that at the time we thought, okay, there's going to be a lot of these coal plants. We have to really start working on capturing the CO2 from a lot of these coal plants. So you're going to see coal here. Actually, coal is kind of going away thanks to the natural gas, the fracking boom, and natural gas has become a lot cheaper. So it's still there, but as it turns out, there's other ways, other forms of energy that are being generated now besides coal. So what we do pretend that this is a refinery or a steel mill, et cetera. You burn the fossil fuels to get energy out of it, that get the heat, and the heat turns a turbine, for example, gives you electricity, and what's left over is carbon dioxide, as well as some other pollutants that hopefully get removed before they go up the stack. But the carbon dioxide basically goes up the stack. So what CCS is, it's capturing that CO2. So you reduce the CO2 emissions to the air. Right now, we're storing the CO2 in the air. We have been since the Industrial Revolution. So you capture it from point sources like this, and then you concentrate it into a high-dense fluid. It's called a supercritical fluid. CO2 has a property where if you pressurize it to a certain point, it becomes almost like a liquid, and so it takes up a lot less space. And then you take it and you ship that, usually via pipeline, to some place that's appropriate where you've got good geology that'll be able to take that CO2, and then you inject it deep down into the subsurface. And when I say deep down, I mean really deep down, because you want it to stay in a dense phase fluid because it takes up so much less space, and there's a limited amount of space in the subsurface, you know. So we don't want to use up any more space than we need to. So in general, it's basically below about 3,000 feet. And in some cases, a lot further below than 3,000 feet. So once that's done, then it's stored in the pore spaces for a significant period of time. And different people disagree about what significant is. It's certainly not geological time. We don't know that it could stay down there that long. In many cases, it will. But significant means 1,000 years, 10,000 years. The whole point is to keep it out of the atmosphere. And the other thing, and this is important, is also to keep it from harming groundwater resources. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So currently, we have 14 projects in the U.S. that are storing 20 million metric tons per annum, per year, in the subsurface. By 2055, we need to get up to 3.5 billion, with a B, globally, metric tons per annum. So that's a big way to go. Right now, we're doing about 0.6% of that goal, and that's a goal. We'll know. Hopefully we can achieve it. Don't know if we can. It's a big number. So the next question is, where can you do CCS? Well, the answer to that quickly is where you have favorable geology and where you have large CO2 point sources. So here's another diagram. This comes from the Alberta Geological Society, but it's good enough. And once again, you've got a plant up here somewhere, and then you're capturing the CO2. You're concentrating it and moving it down to some place where, hopefully not too far away, because it costs money to do this, and you want to reduce cost as much as possible, to put it down deep into a saline aquifer, not the type of aquifers that you all deal with. These are aquifers full of brine, really, really highly saline brine that's at deeper depths. That's kind of what you find in oil and gas fields. They're usually filled with brine and then oil or gas. So and in order to accomplish that goal I talked about, these were some numbers that were put together. Basically, this amount would have to be captured to do that. But essentially, you find a place where you have some of these point sources, and then where the geology is amenable to taking some of this large amounts of fluid. So here's the important part, and this is what matters to y'all. It must be a secure and permitted storage site. So this is important. You can't just do it anywhere, and you can't just do it because you want to. This is highly regulated, and it's a good thing it's highly regulated, because one of the main thing is it's supposed to safeguard groundwater resources. I mean, you're going to hear me say that over and over again. That's the main reason for CCS being permitted. It's to safeguard our groundwater. So now some other questions, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the science. Leah warned me. She said, don't go into a lot of the science. If you've got science questions, I'd be glad to answer your questions afterwards or in the hallway, et cetera, or come talk to us later on. I mean, well, we could talk a day about that. But how is CCS done? How is it permitted? How is it funded? How are the sites selected? These are all really important things, and they're important things for you all to understand. So CCS is permitted as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. That should sound familiar to you, because the Safe Drinking Water Act says we're supposed to safeguard our sources of drinking water, both surface and subsurface. So what you all do is the primary thing for CCS permitting is to safeguard that. So it's permitted under the Underground Injection Control Class 6 rules, and those rules were promulgated in 2011. So that's the latest and the newest of these classes in the Underground Injection Control System, the UIC. And the Environmental Protection Agency is right now tasked with doing that. But states are gaining primacy there. As with the others, you may be familiar with Class 2. That's what regulates the oil and gas industry. Class 6 is new, so EPA right now permits most of them, but there's already a couple of states, including North Dakota and Wyoming, that have received primacy. They've gone through the process, and the EPA said, okay, you all do this yourselves. So it takes it out of the federal government's hands and puts it more into the state, under state control. And importantly, Louisiana, Texas, Indiana, some others are seeking primacy. So Texas is in the process of getting primacy. And the agency that would oversee it in Texas is the Railroad Commission. That's by legislative statute in Texas. Now, the other way that CCS is permitted is under, you heard me mention Class 2. It's under Class 2, and that's the enhanced oil recovery. Enhanced oil recovery, actually, this is important, has been going on since 1972, and it started in Texas. It was the first place in the world. It was at the Sack Rock Field, which was one of the fields that I pointed out on that map I showed earlier. And the study we did there, we went and we looked at the Sack Rock Field. We said, okay, at the time, it had been 40 years, and we said, so this has been done, essentially this has been done for 40 years. Surely we're going to see something. We're going to see some CO2 leaking. We're going to see maybe brine that's gotten and damaged the aquifers in that area. We went and looked, and we're scientists. We want to publish our results. We thought, okay, we're going to find something. We found nothing. We looked and looked and looked. We found nothing. So nothing had been, as far as we could tell, nothing had no CO2 was coming out. No brine was being moved up into the potable water resources. So that, and as far as we know, there's still not been any impact. It's been over 50 years now that Sack Rock Field has been undergoing. So EOR is important not only for that, because you can actually sequester CO2 using oil and gas fields to try and get more oil out, but it's important because the technology, the science, and the techniques that the oil and gas industry has used for decades in EOR has provided important learnings for saline CCS, which is where most of the CO2 will be sequestered into saline aquifers, not having anything to do with oil and gas fields. Right now, there's no longer too many projects of EOR going on, basically because of the shale fracking boom. It's just less expensive to frack and produce significant quantities of natural gas and oil doing that than it is to go in and do it with enhanced oil recovery, because it costs money. Costs more money. You have to pay for the CO2. And one of the important things that they learned back then was that 30 to 50% of the CO2 they put in there, they wanted to reuse it. So they'd pump it in there, they'd bring it back out, and it'd bring oil and brine with it, and they'd separate it, the oil, and they'd sell it. And then they'd want to reuse the CO2 and re-inject it. Well, they found out they couldn't get it all back. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get it all back. So that was a problem for them. But their problem is actually CCS's solution. We realized that once you get the CO2 in those little pores between the sand grains or in those little pores in a limestone, you can't get it out. It sort of pinches off and it stays in there. It's capillarily, it's trapped by capillary processes. So that's an important understanding. I'll try not to go into too much science on that. So how is CCS funded? CCS is funded right now, and this is the reason why some of y'all are getting these calls. Is because there's real money to be made out there by doing this, by essentially cleaning up the power plants, cleaning up the refineries, et cetera, and grabbing the CO2. It's funded by what's known as the 45Q federal tax credits, which have been augmented twice. Once in 2018, the amount of CCS that you put away, you could get, I think at that time, $50 per ton for each ton of CO2 you sequestered. Now it's up to $85 per ton if you're doing it in saline aquifer, and $60 per ton if you're sequestering it via enhanced oil recovery. So but you have to document it, and the way you document it is under the Clean Air Act, subpart RR, and so it requires evidence that you're actually doing it. You need to document it, you need to account for it, et cetera. Another way that it's done is the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard Credit, and these credits are bought and sold. People who have credits can sell them, and other folks will pay for them. This requires additional documentation. But this is why CCS, this is real money here. If you're sequestering 1 million tons per year, that's $85 million to you. So that's why people are talking about doing this. I need to hurry up a little bit here. And these are some of the ways that the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard can be implemented. Or if you're doing some of this in Texas, you can actually take that and get a credit in California for it. So how are secure sites selected? Well, first of all, it needs to be below and isolated from an underground source of drinking water. And I said that's obviously really important to you all. It needs to be done in porous strata that can accept the fluids. There needs to be a confining system that prevents the fluids, the CO2 or the brine. In some cases, the brine is worse than the CO2. Prevent it from getting up even close to an underground source of drinking water. Then there's storage security. I've talked about the residual trapping, also known as capillary trapping. It can go into dissolution in the brines, or it can be buoyantly trapped against the confining system. And it needs to be, you can also inject it away from structural highs. Most of those structural highs have been drilled long ago by the oil and gas industry, so they're full of wells. But if you go away from them, you can inject that way. You can use the depleted wells if the wells have been prepared properly. And you need to match the operation to subsurface pressure, et cetera. I really need to hurry up here, so I'm going to skip through some of this pretty quickly. So the important thing is CCS sites are selected using well-established tools and methods, mostly coming from the oil and gas industry. We use pre-existing wells. We use microfossil data to tell us how old the rock formations are. We use seismic data. I'll show you an example of that. And we use principles of geoscience, and then we map it. So we build a subsurface geologic model, similar to what you do with the models in groundwater. And then you build a subsurface flow model. I heard a lot of talking about flow models here. Well, this is the same type of thing. It's the same engineering, the same general thing. It's just a different fluid. So here's some of those examples. Here's some wells. You correlate across the wells. And here's some of the seismic. So this shows you a really good understanding of what the subsurface looks like. And these tools, we actually shot this ourselves at the GCCC offshore from Galveston Island. So, and then you map it, and then you come up with a geologic model. And then you build a flow model. And this is an example of a flow model. This model said after 10 years of injection in 5 different wells, this is where the CO2 would be. So let's see here. I need to hurry up. Then you acquire more data and you iterate. Same thing we're talking about here. You update the models, both of them, the geologic model and the flow model, you make it better. So in summary, CCS is one important CO2 mitigation technology. It's regulated by UIC Class 6 permits. It's funded via a federal tax and a California low carbon fuel standard credit. The sites are selected via tried and true methods that have been used for decades in the oil and gas industry. GCCC has been around since 1998, 25 years, and we're here to advise you, to answer your questions, and have us come out to some of your meetings to talk to you and to your public if they're concerned or interested. We're available and we're happy to come and help you all out. So in conclusion, what does water have to do with CCS? Basically everything. Because protecting groundwater is the #1 reason for the UIC Class 6 rules. And then finally, here's your take-home assignment. These are some questions that we think you should ask of any project that comes into your districts. Is the AOR, the area of review, I didn't get to talk to that about that very much, but is the AOR correctly calculated? Are wells in the AOR identified and remediated? That's really important because those wells are one way that CO2 can get up. These are old wells that weren't made for CCS. One way that the fluid can push up and potentially damage groundwater resources. So ask them that question. Is the AOR monitoring existing wells? Does it add confidence, the monitoring that they're going to use? Is there a robust response plan for any incident? If there's some flawed well isolation, you need to ask about that. And if there's a leakage allegation, how are they going to address that? So thank you for your attention. I don't know if we have time for questions. We're probably out of time.
We are running a little bit short. Are you going to be sticking around?
I'm going to stick around. I'll be out in the hallway. I'd be glad to talk to you. I'll give you my card, etc. But if you don't get that and you have questions, Gulf Coast Carbon Center, you'll find us. Thank you.
Matt.